Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. In this comprehensive overview, we'll explore the complex and fascinating world of Islam in Russia. This diverse and often misunderstood aspect of Russian society has a rich history and faces unique challenges in the modern era. We'll begin by tracing the historical roots of Islam in Russia, from its early arrival to its current status. Then we'll examine the demographics of Russia's Muslim population, including the distribution of Sunni and Shia adherents. Our journey will continue with a look at the daily lives of Russian Muslims, exploring their geographical distribution and cultural practices. We'll also confront the difficulties faced by this community, from social integration to economic challenges. Finally, we'll address the sensitive topic of Islamophobia in Russia, examining attitudes, incidents, and governmental responses. This exploration aims to provide a balanced and informative picture of Islam's place in contemporary Russian society. All right, let's zoom in on the history of Islam in Russia. It's a fascinating journey that spans over 1,000 years. So Islam first made its way into what we now call Russia back in the 7th century. It came through the Caucasus region, which is that mountainous area between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. Arab armies were expanding their territory and spreading their faith, and they reached as far as Derbent, which is in modern-day Dagestan. But the real spread of Islam in Russia kicked off a bit later, around the 8th and 9th centuries. Traders and missionaries traveled along the Volga River, introducing Islam to the Volga Bulgars. These guys were a Turkic people who had a state in what's now Tatarstan. In 922, their ruler, Almush, officially adopted Islam as the state religion. This was a big deal because it established Islam as a major presence in the region. Then came the Mongols. In the 13th century, the Golden Horde, which was part of the Mongol Empire, took control of much of what is now Russia. At first, they were pretty tolerant of different religions, but in 1313, Özbeg Khan converted the Golden Horde to Islam. This really accelerated the spread of Islam in the region. Meanwhile, in the North Caucasus, Islam was spreading too. It started in Dagestan and gradually moved to Chechnya and other nearby areas. This process took centuries and wasn't always smooth. Different Islamic traditions mixed with local customs, creating unique forms of Islam in each area. By the time Ivan the Terrible conquered Kazan in 1552, bringing the Tatar Khanate under Russian rule, Islam was already deeply rooted in many parts of what would become the Russian Empire. The Russians had a complicated relationship with their Muslim subjects. Sometimes they tried to convert them to Orthodox Christianity, other times they were more tolerant. In the 18th and 19th centuries, as Russia expanded into Central Asia and the Caucasus, millions more Muslims came under Russian rule. Catherine the Great actually took a pretty tolerant approach, recognizing Islam and establishing the Orenburg Muslim Spiritual Assembly in 1788 to oversee Islamic affairs. The Soviet era brought big changes. At first, the Bolsheviks tried to co-opt Muslim support, but later they cracked down on religion in general. Many mosques were closed and religious leaders were persecuted. But Islam didn't disappear. It went underground and survived in family and community traditions. After the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, there was a major Islamic revival in Russia. People could openly practice their faith again. New mosques were built, and Islamic education resumed. This revival brought its own challenges, as different interpretations of Islam competed for influence. All right, let's dig into the numbers and demographics of Muslims in Russia. This is a bit tricky because Russia doesn't include religion in its official census, so we're working with estimates and surveys here. According to most reliable estimates, Muslims make up about 10–15% of Russia's total population. With Russia's population being around 146 million, that puts the number of Muslims somewhere between 14 and 20 million people. Some Muslim leaders claim the number is even higher, up to 25 million, but most experts stick to the lower range. Now, when it comes to the breakdown between Sunni and Shia Muslims, Russia follows the global trend. The vast majority of Russian Muslims are Sunni. We're talking about 90–95% of the Muslim population. Shia Muslims are a small minority, probably less than 5%. Most of these Shia Muslims are concentrated in the Republic of Dagestan, particularly among the Lezgin and Azerbaijani communities there. You'll also find some Shia communities in big cities like Moscow, often made up of immigrants from Azerbaijan and Iran. It's worth noting that within the Sunni majority, there's a lot of diversity. You've got different schools of thought and varying levels of religious observance. For instance, many Tatars follow a more moderate, traditional form of Sunni Islam, while some communities in the North Caucasus lean towards more conservative interpretations. Another interesting point is that Russia has one of the largest Muslim populations in Europe. It's not a Muslim majority country, but it has more Muslim citizens than many Muslim majority countries. The Muslim population in Russia is also growing faster than the overall population due to higher birth rates and immigration from Central Asian countries. Some projections suggest that Muslims could make up about 20% of Russia's population by 2050. But here's the thing, these numbers don't tell the whole story. Religious identity in Russia is complex. Many people who identify as Muslim might do so more for cultural or ethnic reasons rather than strict religious observance. And like in many countries, there's a spectrum of how people practice their faith. Also, it's important to remember that Russia's Muslim population isn't one homogeneous group. It includes various ethnic groups like Tatars, Bashkirs, Chechens, Avars, and many others, each with their own cultural traditions that blend with their Islamic practices. So while we can say there are roughly 14-20 million Muslims in Russia, with the vast majority being Sunni, the reality on the ground is much more nuanced and diverse. It's this diversity that makes the Muslim community in Russia so interesting to study and understand. All right, let's dive into the daily lives of Muslims in Russia and where they're primarily located. This is a pretty diverse picture, so I'll try to paint it for you. First off, Muslims in Russia are spread across the country, but there are definitely some areas where they're more concentrated. The North Caucasus region is a major center of Muslim life. Republics like Chechnya, Dagestan, and Ingushetia have Muslim majorities. We're talking 80–90% of the population in some cases. Islam is a huge part of daily life there, influencing everything from local laws to social norms. Then you've got the Volga-Ural region, particularly in republics like Tatarstan and Bashkortostan. These areas have significant Muslim populations, but they're more mixed with other religions. In Tatarstan, for example, about half the population is Muslim. These regions often have a more moderate, traditional form of Islam that's been influenced by centuries of coexistence with Russian Orthodox neighbors. But don't think Muslims are only in these regions. You'll find Muslim communities in most major Russian cities. Moscow, for example, has over 1 million Muslim residents. St. Petersburg, Yekaterinburg, and other big cities have sizable Muslim populations too, often made up of both long-established communities and more recent immigrants. Now, when it comes to daily life, it varies a lot depending on where you are and the individual's level of religious observance. In more conservative areas, like parts of the North Caucasus, you'll see a lot of outward signs of Islamic culture, women wearing hijabs, halal food being the norm, and the call to prayer being a regular part of the day. In more mixed areas or big cities, it might not be as visible. Many Russian Muslims, especially in urban areas, live pretty similar lives to their non-Muslim neighbors. They work in all sorts of jobs. You'll find Muslims in business, education, healthcare, government, you name it. That said, maintaining religious practices can sometimes be a challenge. Finding a place to pray during the workday or getting time off for religious holidays isn't always easy. Many Muslims adapt by praying at home or visiting the mosque, mainly for Friday prayers and important holidays. Speaking of mosques, they're a big part of community life for many Russian Muslims. Moscow's Cathedral Mosque can hold 10,000 people, and it gets pretty packed for Friday prayers. But in some areas, especially smaller cities, there's often a shortage of mosques, which can be a point of tension. Ramadan is a big deal, of course. In Muslim-majority areas, you'll see a real shift in daily rhythms during this month. Even in more mixed areas, many Muslims fast and try to attend extra prayers at the mosque. Eid al-Fitr and Eid al-Adha are major celebrations, often marked by large gatherings and feasts. Education is an interesting area. In some regions, like Chechnya, Islamic education is part of the public school curriculum. In other areas, Islamic education happens mainly in madrasas or weekend schools. There's ongoing debate about how to balance secular and religious education. One thing that's really interesting is how Islamic traditions often blend with local customs. Take Sabantui, for example. It's a Tatar summer festival with roots in both Islamic and pre-Islamic traditions. You'll see this kind of cultural mixing all over Russia. In recent years, there's been growing interest in Islamic finance and halal industries. Cities like Kazan are positioning themselves as centers for these sectors, which is creating new economic opportunities for Muslim communities. So yeah, the daily life of Muslims in Russia is pretty varied. You've got everything from very conservative, religiously oriented communities to more secularized urban Muslims, and a whole spectrum in between. It's this diversity that makes the Muslim experience in Russia so complex and fascinating. All right, let's get into the challenges and problems faced by the Muslim population in Russia. It's a complex situation with various issues at play. One of the biggest challenges is the balancing act between maintaining Islamic identity and integrating into broader Russian society. Many Muslims, especially in more urban areas, feel pressure to downplay their religious identity to fit in or avoid discrimination. This can lead to a sense of cultural alienation or conflict, particularly for younger generations caught between traditional values and modern Russian life. Discrimination is definitely an issue. Muslims, particularly those from the Caucasus or Central Asia, often face prejudice in employment, housing, and everyday interactions. There's a stereotype that links Muslims with terrorism or extremism, which can lead to unfair treatment or suspicion. This is especially problematic when it comes to law enforcement. There have been cases of racial profiling and unwarranted surveillance of Muslim communities. In some regions, particularly in the North Caucasus, there's tension between more conservative Islamic practices and the secular Russian state. For example, in Chechnya, there have been controversies over the enforcement of Islamic dress codes and other religious norms, which some see as conflicting with Russian law and individual rights. Economic issues are another big concern. Many predominantly Muslim regions, especially in the North Caucasus, face high unemployment rates and economic underdevelopment. This can lead to social unrest and make these areas fertile ground for extremist recruitment. There's also the challenge of religious education and leadership. There's often a shortage of well-trained, moderate Islamic scholars and imams in Russia. This has sometimes led to the influence of more radical ideologies imported from abroad. The Russian government has tried to address this by promoting state-approved Islamic education, but this has its own controversies. The building and maintenance of mosques can be a contentious issue. In many areas, especially outside of traditionally Muslim regions, there's often local opposition to the construction of new mosques. This can make it difficult for Muslim communities to have adequate places of worship. Political representation is another challenge. While there are Muslim politicians and officials at various levels of government, many Muslims feel their interests aren't adequately represented in national politics. Terrorism and the government's response to it have had a major impact on Muslim communities. The conflict in Chechnya and terrorist attacks in other parts of Russia have led to increased scrutiny of Muslim populations. While most Russian Muslims strongly oppose extremism, they often feel unfairly associated with these acts. There's also the issue of returning fighters from conflicts in Syria and Iraq. The reintegration of these individuals and preventing further radicalization is a major challenge for both Muslim communities and Russian authorities. Language and cultural preservation can be a struggle, especially for smaller Muslim ethnic groups. There's often a tension between maintaining traditional languages and cultures and the pressure to assimilate into mainstream Russian society. Lastly, there's the broader geopolitical context. Russia's involvement in conflicts in Syria and its relationships with countries like Iran and Turkey can sometimes create complicated situations for Russian Muslims, especially those with ties to these regions. It's worth noting that these problems aren't uniform across all Muslim communities in Russia. The experiences of a Tatar Muslim in Kazan might be very different from those of a Chechen in Grozny or an Uzbek immigrant in Moscow. The diversity of Russia's Muslim population means that the challenges they face are equally diverse and complex. All right, let's delve into the topic of Islamophobia in Russia, the existence of Islamophobic organizations, and any struggles against Islam. This is a sensitive and complex issue, so I'll try to give you a balanced picture. Islamophobia does exist in Russia, much like in many other countries. It's not always overt or organized, but it manifests in various ways. There's often a blurring of lines between Islamophobia, xenophobia, and ethnic prejudice, especially when it comes to attitudes towards people from the Caucasus or Central Asia. In terms of public opinion, surveys have shown that a significant portion of ethnic Russians hold negative views towards Muslims. These attitudes are often fueled by media portrayals that associate Islam with terrorism or portray Muslims as culturally incompatible with Russian society. After terrorist attacks, there's often a spike in anti-Muslim sentiment. However, it's important to note that Russia doesn't have prominent, well-organized anti-Islamic movements like you might see in some Western countries. The Russian government officially recognizes Islam as one of the country's traditional religions, alongside Orthodox Christianity, Judaism, and Buddhism. This official stance somewhat limits overt Islamophobia in public discourse. That said, there are nationalist and far-right groups in Russia that often express anti-Muslim views. These groups usually frame their ideology in terms of Russian ethnic nationalism rather than explicitly anti-Islamic terms. But Muslims, especially those from the Caucasus and Central Asia, are often targets of their rhetoric and sometimes their actions. There have been instances of violence against Muslims and attacks on mosques, though these are not commonplace. More common are cases of discrimination in employment, housing, and day-to-day interactions. Muslims, particularly those who are visibly religious or from ethnic minorities, sometimes face harassment or unequal treatment. The Russian government's approach to Islam is complex. On one hand, it supports established Muslim institutions and leaders who align with state interests. On the other hand, concerns about religious extremism have led to policies that some critics say unfairly target Muslims. For example, certain Islamic texts have been banned as extremist, and some Muslim organizations have faced intense scrutiny or been shut down. In education and media, there have been efforts to promote understanding of Islam as part of Russia's cultural heritage. However, critics argue that these efforts often present a sanitized, state-approved version of Islam that doesn't reflect the diversity of Muslim experiences in Russia. It's worth noting that the situation can vary greatly across different regions of Russia. In predominantly Muslim areas like Tatarstan or Chechnya, Islamophobia is much less of an issue. However, in these areas there can be pressure to conform to conservative interpretations of Islam, which creates its own set of challenges. The struggle against Islam, when it exists, is often framed in terms of fighting religious extremism rather than Islam as a whole. This can lead to situations where legitimate religious practices are sometimes viewed with suspicion. In recent years, there's been growing awareness of Islamophobia as a problem. Some Muslim leaders and civil society organizations are working to combat stereotypes and promote interfaith dialogue. There have also been efforts to improve Islamic education within Russia to counter foreign influences that are perceived as more radical. It's an evolving situation. While challenges remain, there are also positive developments. The increasing visibility of Muslims in Russian public life, in fields ranging from business to sports, is gradually changing perceptions. And in many parts of Russia, Muslims and non-Muslims continue to live side by side, challenging stereotypes through daily interactions. So while Islamophobia exists in Russia, it's not a simple picture. It's intertwined with complex issues of ethnicity, migration, security concerns, and Russia's own multicultural identity. Understanding and addressing these issues remains an ongoing process in Russian society. Well, folks, that wraps up our deep dive into the world of Islam in Russia. It's a complex tapestry of history, culture, and modern-day challenges that's often overlooked in discussions about Russia. From the ancient trade routes that brought Islam to the region, to the diverse communities practicing their faith across the country today, it's a fascinating subject that deserves more attention. I hope this video has given you some new insights and maybe even challenged some preconceptions you might have had. There's always more to learn about the diverse cultures and religions that shape our world. If you found this information valuable and want to explore more topics like this, why not hit that subscribe button? I'm always working on new videos that dig into lesser-known aspects of culture, religion, and society around the globe. By subscribing, you'll make sure you don't miss out on future content. And hey, if you have any thoughts or experiences related to Islam in Russia, or if there are other topics you'd like me to cover, drop a comment below. Your input helps shape the content of this channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.